Good morning and welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. It's a distinct pleasure to be with you one more time to discuss a very important topical matter. Now, I am sure that you are looking forward to the engagement. Now, this morning, we are going to look at some arguments laid out in this article by, what's her name here? Let me pull up that article by Kathy Kay, right? By Kathy Kay. And she is a US special correspondent for the BBC, that is the British Broadcasting Corporation. Now, she's laying out here her article is entitled US Election 2024, Why the World is Watching So Closely, right? So the entire world is watching closely what is happening in the United States in this upcoming 2024 rather election, right? 2000 election is what we passed a lot of years ago, right? But they're watching what is going to happen in 2024 US election. Now, you might ask, why are they watching? Why are they so, engrossed with what is happening in the United States? Now, the fact of the matter is, as we have shown on this channel before, the United States is the superpower of the world. It is the lone superpower of the world, right? It is the military empire of the world. Therefore means that it is on a quest for full spectrum dominance. And by full spectrum dominance, we mean that the United States controls the seas, the airs, cyberspace, technologies, just about every resources on the planet, right? The United States deems it necessary and wants to control, right? So you might have a poor country and people will ask, why is the United States going to that particular poor country, perhaps in Africa, could be in Haiti, wherever, right? And what interest do they have there? Perhaps there is some natural resources there, or it's a line, it's a geopolitical, canal through which the United States can move to achieve its full spectrum dominance objective, right? And that's what we have to understand. So we cannot just look at it from this narrow perspective, but we have to look at the United States from a broader lens, right? From a broader and wider perspective to understand what really is happening in that particular country. And we're seeing the politics here unraveling day after day, right? Every day there is some new drama. And before we begin this article, may I just suggest here, this is a relatively short piece that came out from the Consortium News. I've never heard this before, but Consortium News, and it's an independent investigative journalism and political review. And they have been in operation since 1995. But I saw this yesterday and I thought of sharing this with you briefly, right? It says a political class with the same geopolitical aims, right? So it means, therefore, that the United States, whether it's Republican or it's Democrat, it has the same geopolitical aims or objectives, right? And that is for full spectrum dominance. And it's time for you to get those words in your cranium, in your mind, in your brain, and fasten them there and try to look at what full spectrum dominance is all about, right? It is going to control everything, every aspect, every sphere of human life, right? And you must understand that. Remember, we talked about the lamb-like beast of Revelation 13. Go and study it. Revelation 13 and 14. Look at how the United States is going to transition from being this lamb-like beast into a dragon, right? And a dragon, we know that we spoke about the dragon. The dragon is representative of pagan Rome, also of papal Rome. And the person behind the dragon is the devil. The devil is also known as the dragon, right? Because he is the original dragon, but he passes on his DNA and his traits to human beings who desire to follow him and are looking for world domination. And the United States is just one of the empires, one of the Western empires, right, which is seeking full spectrum dominance. The problem we have here is that the United States, it sits upon a very colossal military power and apparatus, right? And it means, therefore, that they, outside of God's prevention, can do a lot of harm, right? They can inflict a lot of harm on the global population, all right? We know that we won't have an entire world cleansed in terms of, there are some people who are suggesting because of this military might that they have and the military equipment that they have, that they're going to blow the entire world up. We know that those of us who read our Bibles know that God is not going to allow that because he has these nations under check. However, lots of us will die, will be injured, as recently happened during COVID-19 vaccine, COVID-19 pandemic, right? So we have to take stock and we have to be careful of what we are thinking. And don't you believe that the situation there in Gaza between the Israelis and the Palestinians have to do with these people per se? Yes, they are being used as proxies, right? But the fact of the matter is that the United States wants to control that region. And we did talk about the whole quest of controlling Eurasia, that region of the world. Very important for US's geopolitical goal of achieving full spectrum dominance. Without controlling Eurasia, then the United States is not going to be the lone superpower. And it understands that. Britain understood that also, but they weren't able to accomplish that goal. And the United States is determined that she will accomplish that goal of controlling and defeating, right, Eurasia. And for that reason, we have all the wars being waged in our world, right from Russia. Right now, we are also in Yemen. Okay, so the fact of the matter is that you have to wake up and see that things are not going in the way that you think they should go. And I don't want people to talk about, oh, the US is not winning the war. It hasn't got anything to do with winning or losing the war, because as far as they're concerned, they know that they are going to lose some wars, and they're not concerned about losing it. You are the ones who will lose, and the people who have lost their lives and who have been injured, right? They are the ones who are going to lose. The military-industrial complex is not losing as far as they're concerned, right? Because they're selling, huge quantities of weapons, right? And receiving obscene profits from them, among other things, right? And achieving what they will. So the global elites, the military elites, are not losing. We the people are losing from the wars that are being waged. And you must understand that. US citizens must distinguish between the US elites from the global population, because the US elites find the US citizens to be repulsive, right? And they don't care about you, right? And I hope you understand that now. So this white, black, Asian nonsense that you're there talking about, it will behoove US citizens to come together to fight against the global elites and also the US elites who find you to be repulsive, repugnant citizens, right? So don't conflate and think that when the US, loses a war, as it seems to be, oh yeah, let them lose the war because they'll suffer. They are not going to suffer. You are the one who will suffer. The ordinary citizen, the common man will suffer. The global elites continue to be strengthened, right, in their agenda to achieve full spectrum dominance. I hope that message is clear to you and you don't think for 1 second that what is happening in the Middle East, for example, has got anything to do with the Palestinians and the Israelis. In fact, they're being used. And that's what we should say, stop it, because you are using people to achieve your agenda. It's not that the United States or Israel is racist against Palestinians and whatever. even though you might have some of that. But we can say too, the US elites are racist against their common populace in the United States, right? Because even though they're being impoverished as we speak, right, they're not concerned about their well-being, right? They're more concerned about achieving full spectrum dominance in the world, right? And not to improve the lives of their citizens, right? And it's time for you to take stock. Now, we have here the two-party US system is political theater designed to promote powerful interests who stand above and behind the parties, right? So whether it is the Bushes or the Obamas, right? Whether the Bush father or the Bush son, or the Clintons or the Carters, they have the same political agenda, whether it's Trump, right? Or whomever. Yesterday, I was reading from the Guardian newspaper an article in which, that guy there from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, right? The senator from Vermont, the Vermont US Senator, Bernie Sanders, right? Who contested elections twice in the United States, but lost, right? For the Democratic Party, that is. The fact of the matter, he was in an interview and he was suggesting that Donald Trump represented the greatest threat to US democracy, right? Now, how could Donald Trump represent the greatest threat to US democracy, right? The US sits upon, as I'm saying, a gigantic, a colossal military apparatus, right? And somebody of Trump's ilk represents the greatest threat to US democracy. But outside of Trump's personality traits, right? Don't you think that that's an insult to his base? The people who decide that they want to vote for him. I'm not pro-Trump. I do not like some of Trump's mannerisms, right? But Trump is by far not the greatest threat to democracy. The US empire is, right? The greatest threat to not only US democracy, but democracies around the world, right? And that is what we need to understand, right? So when you're running around and thinking that, looking at the political theater, right, that is happening with the whole Trump saga, right? It's nonsense. And as far as I'm concerned, sometimes I do sit and I'm wondering if Trump is not involved in this whole political theater that is happening. Is he being paid? Is this a reality TV show? And I think it is because it distracts Americans from understanding the real issues. Because nothing that is being said in the drama, there's a lawyer here recently, and he was talking to me about the same, Trump debacle and that Trump is going to prison and all of that nonsense, right? And it was so caught up in the events, and I'm trying to allow him to examine the issues, but he was just caught up with the what. He can't move beyond the what, and this is a lawyer, right? To see the how and the why, and to critically assess the issues, because it's not knowing the names of the different lawyers and the prosecutors, right? That's not going to help you. Got to know them so you can have a good conversation and you can be informed, right? But you must educate yourselves around the issues that are being dealt with in this sort of prosecution of the former president. Now we have Consortium News is dedicated to challenging the bipartisan political class that dominates the US and seeks to dominate the world. So it's not only dominating US, but it's also dominating. And I don't like the word, that class that dominates. I don't like and it seeks, right? It seeks to dominate the world. I think that it's already dominating the world. I think it seeks to dominate the US political class, right? Because they have not yet witnessed the vitriol of the US military apparatus, that's US citizens, right? They have not yet witnessed, right, all of the negative realities that come along with militarism at least not yet. You got a little sprinkling in the Waco and some other events, but the fact of the matter is that the real events, if you want to talk to people in Chile, right, into people in Nicaragua, people in Honduras, right, and all these countries who have witnessed in Iran the brunt, right, the brute force of US imperialism and militarism, right? US citizens have just begun and they're seeing where that truck, right, of disaster has already entered the soil and is about to do some serious damage there. The unsophisticated and deceptive mainstream thinking would have us believe that the two major US parties have completely different visions of the world, but they don't, right? They don't, because they belong to the same empire, right? Which has the same agenda. And it's time for us to understand that. But some of us, we get caught up in who is to be the next president. If Trump is the next president, if Biden is the next president, if you are the next president, unless you go with the agenda, they might remove you. But what we do know, and I'm not saying that you might not have a president who wants to veer away, and it seems to some extent that Trump was not entirely compliant with what the military industrial complex wanted him to do. And they will be able to create a lot of, furore about that. And they can win you because they control the media and they can do things to harm you and to destroy your character, right? And to besmirch your reputation, right? They have all of that power. And the sad thing about it, as citizens of the world, we tend to believe everything the media says. So when they seek to destroy us, then, oh yes, Trump is the worst person. Andrew is the most, vicious person I've ever seen because the media says so. And you believe it, right? Even intelligent people who are reading New York Times every day, well, maybe those are the ones who will believe it, because if you find yourself reading New York Times and the Washington Post, it means that those are the only sources that you read from every day. You are not informed, right? You've got to read other sources to get your information, right? Very important that you understand that. On some domestic issues, that is largely true. Abortion and guns come to mind. But on foreign affairs, both parties are driven by interests more powerful than the political authority invested in them, and their aim is the same: expand US global dominance economically, politically, and militarily to further enrich America's rulers with no regard for the democratic rights of the people or peoples. And here, I'm sure peoples would refer to peoples of the world, right? Just look at how many democracies the US has overthrown to install dictators. So when Trump is going to be the dictator, the United States has always been promoting dictators in the world. Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, before he was murdered by them, was their guy, right? They put him up and he, inflicted terror on the Dominican population, controlled by Washington, until he got, out of himself and he was behaving, more powerful than Washington wanted him to behave, right? He wound up killing or attempted to kill, heads of state. When they saw that that was happening, they knew that, and that they controlled him before. They were very, very afraid, and the US didn't want to be associated with the guy, with Trujillo, right? And he had to be taken out, right? So how could Donald Trump, who is not even a politician, just 4 years in office? And the fact of the matter, yeah, he was in office 4 years and we didn't see any major shift from US foreign policy. The American drum of being an empire still was in vogue, right? We didn't see any of that difference. In fact, we saw where Trump even was dividing the Caribbean region over Venezuela, right? The CARICOM was entirely divided because Trump decided that he wanted to invade Venezuela, right? And there were countries in the Caribbean like the St. Vincent and the Grenadines who were not in agreement. And he isolated the Caribbean, and we were divided, as far as that particular decision of the US to invade Venezuela was concerned, right? So Trump also was that military president, right, of the United States, who sat atop of the military-industrial complex. Now, well, at least he represents them. He might not sit atop of them, but he represents them and their military might. Now, let us look at this where Katie, or Katty K, not Katie, but Katty, right? K, and she's a US special correspondent for the BBC, as we've just said. Now, the first votes in the US presidential race will be cast on Monday in the state of Iowa, when Republicans choose who they want to take on Democratic President Joe Biden. It's an election being watched not just in the US, but around the world. After recently spending a few weeks in Europe, the subject of America's presidential election was a constant topic of intense curiosity and concern among the people I spoke to. And no wonder. The US is currently involved in two hot wars, Ukraine and Gaza, and we can now say Yemen is on its way. Meanwhile, US-China relations have deteriorated and tensions in the Asia-Pacific region have risen. Closer to home, Central American nations are under the spotlight as a growing number of migrants are trying to get to the US through a border which seems more porous by the day. And this week, there were US-led airstrikes against the Houthis rebels in Yemen. There is almost no area of the world where American leadership doesn't matter, right? And I would like all Americans, I'm going to read it again. There is almost no area of the world where American leadership doesn't matter, right? Americans sometimes like to say, oh, why are people so interested in the American election? Yes, because you don't understand that the US is an empire. The US is not a democracy. Had you understood that, you would not have made that sort of, assertion. Because people have to be, because their lives, their political, future, their economic future, right? Their military future depends on what happens in Washington. Because for the most part, as we have said before, Washington runs the show, right? And these are just puppets running around, whether they're from Jamaica or from Trinidad or wherever they are, right? They are not running the show. Now, the prospect of Republican Donald Trump returning to office with his America First foreign policy agenda adds more uncertainty to an already tumultuous picture. So they're using Trump now to distract us and to make us believe that we have to vote for Joe Biden because he is the one who is going to protect the democracy of the United States. A man who is 81 years old and who is showing signs, potent signs of dementia, right? This guy, Joe Biden, is going to save democracy. I sometimes wonder, what people have in their brains. And it's not the media that I'm blaming. It's we, the people, I'm blaming, right? Because that is an effective propaganda. And perhaps if I were a propagandist, I would use it. Quite effective, isn't it? And many people, even during the 2020 elections, they believed it, right? and thought Donald Trump was so catastrophic, right, that they had to vote for this man, right? And only if you knew the history of this man, of the man called Joe Biden, right? And the fact that he has never voted against wars, right? Right? He is one of the primary supporters of the military industrial complex, right? And the mint press, and one of these days I probably should bring that to your attention, but there is a newspaper online called Mint Press. And if you want to go, you can go on mintpress.net. And the article was entitled, I don't have it pulled up here, but I'm just giving you a summary of the article, was entitled the 10 presidents. I'm just giving you my paraphrasing the title here. The 10 presidents, or not the 10 US senators, right, that the Israeli lobbyist group has donated the most money to, something of the sort, right? Yeah, that's what the article, the gist of the article. And if I recall accurately, President Biden was number one, right? So he's funded and receives huge donations and campaign funds from this Israel lobby or lobbyist group, right? So there's no way that he's going to be pro-Palestinian. He might make some statements, which sounds, because he needs to sound presidential and he needs to sound as if he's representing his space, right? But it doesn't mean that he means it. And that is why you need to look at people behind the scenes and who is supporting these people, right? For you to really understand who we're dealing with. Some countries look forward to his return, but many of America's allies are more fearful about the possible comeback of an unorthodox president they found hard to deal with the first time around, right? Now, I don't know if the people, the allies, the so-called allies, care if it is Donald Trump or it is President Biden, because they understand that, the military-industrial complex runs the show, right? I don't think they care. How is it that they're having a good relationship with Joe Biden at this point in time, and Joe Biden is not even conscious about what's going on in the world? How can they have a serious conversation with Joe Biden, given his mental capacity, right? And I'm not trying to insult Joe Biden, right? Because we're all heading there, and we don't know if that sickness will also affect us. What I do know is that it is what it is, that it's going to be difficult. It's just like my being a teacher and going into the classroom and I'm suffering from dementia. Maybe I need to withdraw from that job, right? Because then I will not be able to perform adequately, all right? The job that I was given, the task that I was given to do, right? Now, Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee and is also co-chair of President Biden's re-election campaign, told me that in every meeting he's had with foreign leaders or foreign secretaries, every meeting, look at the hyperbole. At some point, they raised the question of whether American voters could really turn once more to President Donald Trump. One of the fascinating aspects of this article, and I'm seeing it articles after articles in the US media, in the British media, and perhaps in in the Caribbean too. The entire media apparatus have joined forces in their fight against Donald Trump, Donald Trump's presidency, right? Why? Why? Yes, we can understand that the US president is very important and but the fact of the matter is, what rational argument could you present that Donald Trump was the greatest enemy that the US has ever seen in terms of a presidential candidate? Well, he was president for 4 years, right? And as I said before, he didn't do anything different. There wasn't necessarily a paradigm shift in the United States, apart from, all the domestic thing here where one of his policies that he didn't believe in abortion rights, and the climate change agenda thing, crisis. And these agendas are distractions, right? As far as I'm concerned, these agendas are distractions from the real issues, from the substantive issues. And there are people, when it came on to the abortion rights, they were so emotionally charged that they went out to the streets to protest about the killing of babies, right? Because that is more important to them than talking about and protesting against this gigantic, this colossal military apparatus in the United States and around the world, right? To them, that's nothing. All they want to have is a right to abort babies, right? Because that's going to save democracy. And that's one of the things that Biden is using one of the strategies he's using, this whole abortion rights issue and the climate change, right? Now we see Kerry is going out, that's John Kerry, to head Joe Biden's campaign, um, you know, sort of trade, or whatever you want to call it, right? Because it's all about, I think John Kerry has says that without President Biden, then the whole climate change agenda will suffer, all right? And will not be able to make the progressive moves that are now in operation. Now, I find that to be interesting, that people are going to put climate change and abortion rights over basic socioeconomic policies, right? Right? You have people who are suffering. Let's look at Haiti, for example. Do you think that to Haitians it matters about climate change when they are getting up every day and probably not finding food to eat? Right? In Palestine, where we have the wars being waged, in the Ukraine, or wherever wars are being waged right now, do you think they wake up thinking about climate change? Right? So we have to look at what is more important right now, right? And the first issue is to stop the wars. That's what we should be working on, because that's also going to destroy our planet and is already destroying our planet, right? If we stop the wars, then, and we feed the people, we use the money to feed the global populace, right? Then we can talk about climate change, right? And then we can have serious debates about, and also intelligent and dispassionate debates about abortion rights. But it seems to me that we're putting these issues at the top when they should not be at the top. It's just like saying that somebody invites you to a wedding, you don't have any food to eat, right? Well, you might have to decline, right? As much as the wedding is important, right? Because food is, as would say, it's a staff of life, right? We have to eat, and we cannot, survive without eating. So the first priority is to get food, and having got food, and if you have some, change left over, and you can buy a suit, right, to go to the wedding, then you do that. But the priority is to feed your bodies, right? Because without the body being nutrified, then you won't be able to go to the wedding in the first place. Right? So talking about all of these things without cementing and dealing with the important substantive issues at stake right now, right, is not going to do anything for the voters. Now, in no capital in the world are they watching this campaign as closely as they are in Kyiv. The fate of the war arguably depends on the outcome. If the policy of the next president, whoever he is, will be different toward Ukraine, colder or more inward-oriented, then I think that these signals will greatly affect the course of the war, President Zelensky said recently. Now, the he didn't name what Mr. Trump has said that he would end the war in 24 hours, which I find ridiculous. Everything that Trump says about ending the war is ridiculous. Every war he's going to end in 24 hours. Every conflict he's going to suppress in 24 hours is ridiculous, right? Because nobody knows how long that process will take. Best if he had said that he would intervene and he will study, but to say that he's going to end the war in 24 hours is ridiculous. Of being elected, although he hasn't explained how. The Ukrainians are concerned he would push for negotiations that wouldn't favor their cause. Now, one of the things you have to understand about the Democrats and the Republicans is that they wage different wars and to divide the public. It's the same agenda, but they want you to think that the agenda is different, so they wage different wars. So you might have the Republicans going to, China, waging a war with China, and you have the Democrats waging a war against Russia, right? And so they do. But one of the things you need to understand is that every sitting president, whether Republican or Democrat, right, is going to wage a war because that is a major thrust of empires in order to control, because people don't easily give up their rights and their resources, right, and their land, then you've got to wage wars against them, right? Because the only way you can control is through force, right? And that is the whole understanding, that is the whole essence of this full spectrum dominance. To control, right? To control militarily, that's the word, right? To control militarily the resources of the world, right? And it's time for you to understand that, right? It is time for you to wake up and understand that, right? Now, the implications of a shift in U.S. policy would be felt beyond Ukraine's border and would particularly worry those European states that neighbor Russia. Further afield, other American allies may decide the U.S. is not a reliable security partner. One U.S. senator raised the prospect of Japan developing its own nuclear arsenal if America stops helping Ukraine. So we see where there is an alliance to continue the war in the Ukraine. And the war in the Ukraine is a war against Russia, right? The Ukraine is only being used as proxy. Now, Tokyo, he told me, could decide the American nuclear security umbrella simply has too many holes in it. There's also the prospect that a re-elected President Trump would act on his desire to pull America out of NATO, effectively crippling the military alliance. Two people with ties to the Trump campaign have told me he does not plan to do just that. Or he does plan, rather, to do just that. He wants to take Americans out of NATO. Now, Europeans say Senator Coons are right to be anxious. The US and its European allies have a significant common challenge. Together, we have to show the world that Putin can't outlast us and that Chinese President Xi's vision of authoritarianism is not the best for the world. Now, I just wanted to end there to let you know that the entire world, right, is focused on the United States and its impending 2024 election, right? Entire world, right, is watching as the political drama in the United States unfolds, because it is drama, right? And many of us are investing our times and our energy, or time, I should say, and energy in this election. I hope you will not be distracted, and I hope that you will assess the substantive issues, right? And not the issues that the New York Times and the Washington Posts and the Guardians and the BBCs of the world. Notice how the BBC is just, another organ of US media, another extension, of the US media. Because what the BBC should be doing is to be looking dispassionately at the presidents of the United States, and and having a comparison between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, right? But they decide that they are going to side with the US military industrial complex. And it's just like an extension of the New York Times and the Washington Post. Nothing different, right? Years ago, people, listen to the BBC and think of the BBC is bringing objective news. That era has passed, right? The BBC seems to me now just to be another propaganda uh, paper, right? Another paper that dispenses, that disseminates propaganda, right? So be careful with these media sources that you are reading, right? And you have to read definitely with a critical eye. Thank you so much for joining, right? And I hope that we will see each other very soon.